Welcome. In this video, we're going to be discussing the Rosetta Stone. Now, the reason why the Rosetta Stone is so famous is because inscribed upon it is a decree written 3 times in 3 different languages. On the top, we have hieroglyphics. In the middle, we have Demotic. And at the bottom, we have Greek. The Rosetta Stone was discovered in 1799 during the Napoleonic campaigns in Egypt. And prior to its discovery, no one knew how to read hieroglyphics. But because the stone allowed Egyptologists to compare hieroglyphics with the well-known ancient Greek language, they could decipher the hieroglyphics. Now, this video isn't going to be about the different languages of the Rosetta Stone. Rather, it's going to be about the actual content of the stone, what's actually written on it. And we're going to be reading translations of the stone itself. But first, we need to ask ourselves a question. What is the historical context of the Rosetta Stone? Well, it all begins with 2 kings, Ptolemy IV of Egypt and Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire. And these 2 kings are fighting the 4th Syrian War. Antiochus III has just invaded into Ptolemy's territory. So Ptolemy reclaims the lost land in the Battle of Raphia. And during this battle, he's able to push Antiochus back and reclaim his lost land. We read about the 4th Syrian War and the Battle of Raphia in the writings of Polybius, who writes the following. Such was the result of the Battle of Raphia fought by the kings for the possession of Syria. After paying the last honours to the dead, Antiochus returned to his own land with his army, and Ptolemy took without resistance Raphia and the other towns. Now, after Ptolemy's success at the Battle of Raphia, his Egyptian subjects begin to revolt against his kingship. As we continue to read in Polybius, Ptolemy, however, immediately after these events, became involved in a war with his Egyptian subjects, for in arming them for his campaign against Antiochus, he had taken a step which, while it served his immediate purpose sufficiently well, proved eventually disastrous. Elated with their victory at Raphia, they refused any longer to receive orders from the king, but looked out for a leader to represent them, on the ground that they were quite able to maintain their independence. And this they succeeded in doing before very long. End quote. So immediately after the Battle of Raphia, the Ptolemaic Empire descends into chaos, with the Egyptian people revolting against their own king. During this time, Ptolemy IV dies in unclear circumstances. He was most likely assassinated. And he's replaced by his 6-year-old son, Ptolemy V. So this child king, Ptolemy V, is placed in a very difficult situation, as his own people are revolting against him. So to secure his hold on power and to legitimize his kingship, he appeals to the Egyptian priests. Priests were held in high esteem in Egyptian society, and for the Ptolemies to maintain their rule, it was essential that they had the support of the priesthood. It's also important to remember that Ptolemy is not a native Egyptian. Ethnically, he's Macedonian. So to legitimize himself in the eyes of the Egyptian people, he must win the favor of the Egyptian priests. So he begins to lavish favors upon them. And in return, the priests affirm Ptolemy's rule and begin to urge the Egyptian people to likewise support the king. To convince the people to support the king, the priests in the city of Memphis, which is in the north of Egypt, issue a decree called the Memphis Decree. This decree was engraved upon large stone columns and erected in temples throughout Egypt. The most famous stone column with the Memphis Decree upon it is none other than the Rosetta Stone. A scholar from the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago writes the following about the Rosetta Stone. In the stone's text, Ptolemy V is presented as a beneficent ruler who will renew financial support for the temples, increase priestly stipends, reduce taxes, offer amnesty for prisoners, and sponsor prominent animal cults. In return, the royal cult will be reaffirmed through statues called Ptolemy Protector of Egypt, erected in temples throughout the land. The priests are to tend to the statues 3 times daily and celebrate the holidays of the king's birth and the day of his ascension each month. The king's authority is therefore continually reaffirmed while material benefits are conferred on the Egyptian religious administration. End quote. Therefore, it's quite clear that the Rosetta Stone functions as a means of placating the disgruntled Egyptian masses. Ptolemy lavishes gifts upon the priests, and in return, the priests legitimize Ptolemy and urge the Egyptian people to pledge their allegiance to Ptolemy as well. Now, I absolutely love actually reading the original sources, so let's together read some portions of the Rosetta Stone. Quote, "Inasmuch as King Ptolemy, the ever-living, the beloved of Ptah, the god of Epiphanes Eucratios, the offspring of King Ptolemy IV and Queen Arsinoe, the god of Philopatros, hath given many benefactions both to the temples and to those that dwell therein, and to all those who are subject to his dominion, being a god born of a god and goddess, and towards the gods being full of benevolent piety." So in this section, we can see that Ptolemy isn't just giving favors to the priests, but to all of Egyptians as well. As you can see here, it says he has given many benefactions both to the temples and to those that dwell therein, so that's referring to the priests. But then it adds, and to all of those who are subject to his dominion, that's referring to the people themselves. So Ptolemy is giving favors to both the priests and the people of Egypt in order to win back their favor. So let's continue to read the Rosetta Stone and see what favors Ptolemy gives to the priests. Firstly, he confirms the temple revenue. We read, quote, "and hath ordered that revenues of the temples and the grants which are made to them annually, both in respect of grain and money, and also the proper portion which is assigned to the gods from the vineyards and from the gardens and the other possessions of the gods, should, as they were in the reign of his father, remain the same." End quote. Another favor Ptolemy gives to the priests is that he abolishes the priestly fee. We read, quote, "and in respect of the priests also, he hath also commanded that they should pay no more as their fee for consecration than what they had been formerly assessed in the time of his father and up to the first year of his reign." And another favor that we read about is that Ptolemy abolishes the priestly annual journey to Alexandria. We read, quote, "and further he hath released members of the priestly class from the obligation to sail down the Nile annually to Alexandria." End quote. Now, in return for all of these favors, the priests will legitimize Ptolemy by performing the necessary religious ceremonies for a pharaoh. So festivals are established in honor of Ptolemy V. We read, quote, "the birthday of the king, and whereon he received the sovereignty from his father, on these days a festival and a panegyry shall be celebrated in the temples of Egypt each month, and sacrifices and libations and all the other rites and ceremonies which are prescribed shall be duly performed as on other festivals." End quote. Now, the Memphis Decree doesn't stop there. Ptolemy also needs to win back the favor of the people themselves. So if you're a ruler and you want to placate the masses, what do? Well, obviously, you reduce taxes. So we read, quote, "the taxes and dues which come to him from Egypt, some he hath finally remitted, and others he hath reduced, so that the people and all the others might be prosperous during his reign. And he hath remitted to the natives of Egypt and to all the other people domiciled in his kingdom the debts which were due to the royal treasury, which were indeed very many in number." End quote. Ptolemy also abolishes the conscription into the navy. We read, quote, "and he hath likewise commanded that men shall no longer be seized by force for service in the navy." And we also read that he releases some prisoners, quote, "and he hath set free from the charges against them those who were in the prisons and who had been there for a long time because of non-settlement of their cases." End quote. Now, all of these favors are attempting to win back the trust of the people after the huge rebellion which occurred during the reign of his father, Ptolemy IV. And the Memphis Decree explicitly mentions that Ptolemy punishes those who revolted against his father. We read, quote, "and the men who had led astray the rebels in the time of his father, Ptolemy IV, and had stirred up revolt in the country, and had committed sacrilege in the temples, having come into Memphis for the purpose of avenging his father and his own sovereignty, he punished according to their deserts at the time when he came there to perform the duly appointed ceremonies for his reception of the crown." End quote. Having now spoken about the actual content of the Rosetta Stone, let's again return to why the Rosetta Stone is actually famous. At the very end of the Memphis Decree, it discusses how the decree should be promulgated by the priests throughout Egypt. The decree should be inscribed upon stones and placed in temples throughout Egypt. Now, importantly, the decree is to be inscribed in 3 different languages. At the very end of the decree, we read the following, quote, "and this decree shall be inscribed upon the stela of hard stone in holy and in native and in Greek letters, and a stela should be set up in each of the temples of the first, second, and third class, near the image of the ever-living king." End quote. So this decree is to be inscribed in holy letters, which is referring to hieroglyphics, a language used by the priests for religious purposes. Other translations of the Rosetta Stone refer to this as, quote, "the language of the gods." Then it's also to be written in the native letters, referring to Egyptian Demotic, a language which was used for everyday purposes. Other translations refer to this as, quote, "the language of documents." And finally, in Greek letters. Remember that the reason why Greek is being used here is because the language of the Ptolemaic government, ever since Alexander conquered Egypt, has been Greek. So these are the three languages that we find on the Rosetta Stone. And as we began this video, hieroglyphics are at the top, Demotic is in the middle, and Greek is right down the bottom. And that is a nice little summary of what the Rosetta Stone is, the content of it, and why it's famous. Hopefully you feel like you have a good grasp of what the Rosetta Stone is and the historical context for it. As always, if you're enjoying these videos, your support would be greatly appreciated, so please consider supporting me on Patreon. Find the link in the description below. If donating isn't something you're able to do, it's still tremendously helpful if you hit that like button and leave a comment. And finally, make sure you are subscribed to get my next video. Thank you for watching until the end, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.